Picture a dog out on, like a vast rolling hillside.
Oh, yeah.
It is thinking, it's calculating, and moving at absolute top speed, all at exactly the same time.
Right, and it's been out there for hours.
Exactly, just totally anticipating the movement of a flock of sheep. And there isn't a human anywhere close enough to direct its every step.
It's amazing to watch.
It really is. I mean, that image, that incredible blend of pure athleticism and independent intelligence, that is the absolute defining essence of the Australian Shepherd.
Completely.
So we've pulled together a massive stack of sources for this duck dive today. We're talking veterinary journals, canine genetic research papers, official breed health standards, just to really look at what makes this animal tick.
And the overarching theme across all those journals, well, it's this concept of a biological trade-off.
Right.
Because the intense stamina, the constant need for a job, that hyper-reactive processing speed, every single one of those traits traces directly back to the demands of ranch work.
Yeah, they were literally built for it.
Exactly. But you really cannot selectively breed for elite, hyper-specific physical and mental traits without inadvertently carrying along some genetic vulnerabilities.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that paradox is really the core mission of our deep dive today.
Yeah, it's a big one.
We are looking at the health profile of the Australian Shepherd, and we're exploring how the exact same processes that made them these elite working dogs also created some very specific bottlenecks in their health.
Which is super important for anyone who owns one or is thinking about getting one.
Definitely. But before we dive into the clinical research, let's set a clear tone for you, the listener. When we talk about these health risks today, we are talking about predisposition, not destiny.
Right. And I think that is the most empowering takeaway from all the current genetic research we looked at.
It really changes the perspective.
It does. Genetics simply influence the baseline risk. It's your observation, your preventive steps, and early veterinary care that actually dictate how that genetic risk plays out in the real world.
So it's not a guaranteed sentence.
Not at all. I mean, many of these conditions respond beautifully to early detection and just, good environmental management.
Think of genetics like the architectural blueprint of a custom-built house.
I like that analogy.
Right. So the blueprint might dictate that the house is going to have this massive, heavy slate roof. And that is a structural risk.
A huge one.
But the quality of the support beams you actually install and how you maintain the foundation over the years that determines if the roof ever actually caves in.
Exactly. You have the power to reinforce the structure.
Right. Oh, and before we get into the heavy science, just a really quick disclaimer. This deep dive is for educational purposes only. If you are ever concerned about your dog's health, you should always consult your veterinarian.
Always.
Okay. So with that foundation laid, let's look at the physical toll of the breed's most defining trait, that relentless athletic stamina.
Yeah, and the veterinary literature focuses really heavily on the joints here.
Specifically hip and elbow dysplasia, right?
Yes. And since you, our listener, are probably pretty familiar with the basic anatomy of a canine joint, we really need to look at this through the lens of biomechanics to understand the Aussie.
Right, because I was reading the orthopedic studies in our sources, and the issue isn't just that the dog runs a lot, it's the actual physics of how they run.
It's totally different from a dog just jogging in a straight line.
Exactly. An Australian Shepherd herding sheep is performing these high-speed 180-degree pivots. They do sudden hard stops, lateral cuts.
Oh, the lateral cuts are brutal.
Yeah, and that puts just an immense amount of shearing force and torque directly on the cartilage.
And that torque is precisely the trigger we need to talk about. So dysplasia basically involves the joint developing with a certain degree of looseness.
Like it just doesn't fit perfectly tight.
Right, there's laxity in the surrounding ligaments, or maybe the socket is just slightly too shallow.
Okay.
Now, when a dog is just walking down the sidewalk in a straight line, that looseness might not cause any immediate damage at all.
Makes sense.
But when you have a 40 to 50-pound dog executing a high-speed lateral cut, that mechanical laxity allows the joint to subluxate.
Which means it partially slips out of place.
Exactly, it slips. And that abnormal friction basically shreds the articular cartilage over time.
Ouch.
Yeah, and that kicks off a whole cascade of inflammation. The body then tries to stabilize that loose joint by producing bone spurs, which eventually leads to full-blown osteoarthritis.
Wow. And I noticed in the research that nutrition and weight management were highlighted almost as much as the actual genetic scores for dysplasia.
Oh, absolutely. They are heavily linked.
But I want to push back on a common assumption here. Wait, I always thought joint problems only affect overweight dogs.
That is such a common myth, but no. Weight is actually a massive mechanical multiplier for the underlying genetic flaw.
Okay, a multiplier.
Right. Genetics dictate the structural laxity of the joint entirely independent of the dog's body condition. So, I mean, a perfectly lean athletic dog can still have severe genetically driven dysplasia.
Really? Even if they look perfectly fit?
Even then. But if you add even a minor amount of excess weight on top of a structurally compromised joint, you exponentially increase the compressive load during those high-speed pivots.
Oh, I see.
You are essentially adding a heavy shifting backpack to a dog whose hinges are already loose.
That's a great way to picture it.
Yeah. Maintaining a very lean body condition is honestly one of the most effective non-surgical interventions an owner can possibly provide.
Which brings up a really practical challenge for the owner, honestly. Because this breed's working drive is so intense.
Oh, they don't have an off switch.
No, they will happily try to herd a Roomba for 3 hours on a torn ligament. They just seem to entirely ignore pain when they are focused on a job.
They really do.
So how are you supposed to spot early joint degradation in a dog that literally won't stop doing backflips for a tennis ball?
It's tough because adrenaline and that intense working drive are incredibly effective at masking clinical pain. You are very rarely going to spot the degradation while the dog is actively playing.
When do you see it?
The diagnostic clues emerge during the recovery phase. So if we connect this to the bigger picture, the veterinary journals really advise owners to watch for what they call post-rest stiffness.
Post-rest stiffness. Okay.
Yeah. So after that vigorous day at the park, does the dog struggle to rise from their bed the very next morning?
Oh, right.
Do they have a subtle sort of shifting lameness when the weather turns cold, a persistent limp, or a reluctance to jump into the back of the car? Those things should never be dismissed as just normal muscular fatigue or ordinary soreness.
Right. It's not just them being tired from a long hike.
Exactly. Normal muscular fatigue resolves quickly. A persistent issue needs a vet's eyes.
Okay, so we have a dog navigating the physical world with joints that are under high stress. But to execute those high-speed maneuvers in the first place, they need exceptional visual acuity.
They absolutely do.
Which brings us to the visual system. Our sources dedicate a lot of ink to the breed's eyes, and it seems this is another area where selective breeding created a really severe genetic bottleneck.
It's a huge focus in the literature. The visual demands on a working herding dog are just staggering. I mean, they have to track multiple moving targets across completely varying distances and constantly shifting lighting conditions.
Right, chasing sheep at dusk, that sort of thing.
Exactly. But the overlapping bloodlines that were used to lock in those amazing herding traits, well, they also concentrated the prevalence of several inherited eye conditions.
And the literature mainly focuses on 3 primary concerns, right? The big 3.
Yes. Hereditary cataracts, progressive retinal atrophy, and Collie eye anomaly.
Let's dig into the mechanics of progressive retinal atrophy, or PRA.
Okay, PRA is a really interesting one.
I was looking at the genetic pathways in the research, and it noted that owners typically notice poor night vision long before the daytime vision is ever affected.
Right.
Is that because the mutation specifically targets the rod cells in the retina before the cone cells?
That is a brilliant observation, and yes, that is the exact mechanism.
Oh, cool.
So just to review the anatomy quickly, the retina contains rods, which process low-light vision and motion tracking.
Okay.
And it also has cones, which handle color and bright daylight.
Right.
The specific PRA mutation that is so prevalent in these herding breeds triggers a premature programmed cell death, which is called apoptosis, and that process begins specifically in the rod cells first.
So the dog literally starts losing the ability to process dim light while their daytime vision might still seem perfectly fine to the owner.
Exactly. Which is why the early behavioral signs are just so subtle.
Like what kind of signs?
Well, you might notice the dog suddenly hesitating at the edge of the porch before going out into a dark yard. Or maybe they seem unusually clumsy in a dimly lit hallway at night.
Oh, wow. Because the rods are dying.
Yes. Now, the cones eventually degenerate as well, and that leads to total vision loss. But that early rod cell degradation is your clinical red flag.
That makes the timeline super crucial. But then we have Collie eye anomaly, or CEA, which seems to operate on a completely different timeline entirely. The sources classify this as a developmental defect, meaning it's not a progressive decay of cells over time, like PRA, but a structural error that is present from the absolute moment the puppy is born.
Right. CEA is fascinating from a developmental standpoint. It primarily involves choroidal hypoplasia.
Which is what exactly?
Essentially, the network of blood vessels that nourish the retina completely fails to develop fully in utero.
Oh, wow. So before they're even born.
Yes. And the severity is a massive spectrum. A really mild case might just leave a small pale patch at the back of the eye with zero noticeable effect on the dog's life at all.
And a severe case.
A severe case can involve full retinal detachment or colobomas, which are actual pits or physical holes in the structure of the eye.
So this isn't just an old dog thing like humans needing reading glasses as they age.
Exactly. This completely shatters that misconception.
Right.
We aren't talking about a senior dog needing reading glasses. We're talking about a tiny puppy opening its eyes to a structural defect, or a young adult dog suddenly experiencing cellular apoptosis with PRA.
That is so important for owners to realize.
It is. Waiting until a dog has a gray muzzle to schedule an eye exam means you have entirely missed the window for proactive management.
So when should they go?
Veterinary ophthalmologists recommend formal screening starting in puppyhood.
Puppyhood.
Yes. They dilate the pupil, they examine the back of the retina, and they can identify these structural or cellular changes literally years before the dog starts bumping into furniture.
Because the dog will just adapt, right?
Exactly. Dogs are incredibly adept at using their other senses, like smell and hearing and their spatial memory, to completely compensate for failing vision.
Which makes relying on home observation alone very dangerous.
Extremely dangerous. You won't notice until it's far too late.
Okay, we've covered the mechanical torque on the joints and the cellular degradation in the visual system. I want to transition to a topic in the genetic research that is completely invisible to the naked eye.
Oh, I know where we're going.
But it is absolutely critical for anyone taking their dog to a vet. I'm talking about the MDR1 gene mutation.
Multi-drug resistance, yes.
Yeah.
It is honestly one of the most vital things for an owner of
Yeah.
any herding breed to understand.
The basic analogy I always hear is that it's like a bouncer at a VIP club falling asleep and letting dangerous drugs into the brain.
That's a popular way to describe it, yeah.
But here's where it gets really interesting for this deep dive. I want the actual physiological mechanism because the research references a very specific protein, P-glycoprotein.
Right.
How does this actually operate at the blood-brain barrier?
Okay, so the blood-brain barrier is this highly selective, semi-permeable border of endothelial cells. Its entire job is to let good nutrients in while keeping dangerous neurotoxins out.
Okay, keeping the brain safe.
Exactly. Now, P-glycoprotein is essentially an active bailing pump that is embedded right in that barrier.
An active comp.
Yes. When certain foreign chemicals, like very specific veterinary medications, try to cross over into the brain tissue, P-glycoprotein physically binds to them and literally pumps them back out into the bloodstream.
Oh, wow.
It is an ATP-dependent pump, and it works continuously to keep the brain's internal environment perfectly stable.
So in an Australian Shepherd with the MDR1 mutation, the genetic code for building that pump is basically scrambled.
Exactly.
So the pump is fundamentally broken.
Right. What's fascinating here is that the pump either doesn't function efficiently at all, or it just isn't produced in sufficient quantities by the body.
And without it.
Without that active bailing mechanism, drugs that are supposed to be kept at a really safe, marginal level within the brain suddenly flood the neural tissues.
That sounds terrifying.
It is. A standard, normal dose of a common anti-parasitic like ivermectin.
Which is in heartworm meds, right?
Yes, or certain sedatives they use at the clinic, or even some over-the-counter antidiarrheal medications they can build up to catastrophic toxic levels in the brain.
Just from a normal dose.
Yes. It triggers severe neurological depression, massive tremors, seizures, and it can very easily be fatal.
If I'm an owner reading this, my very first thought might be, well, my dog is 5 years old, they've had plenty of shots and pills, and they've never had a seizure, so they obviously don't have the mutation.
Oh boy.
If my dog has never reacted badly to medicine, do I still need to care about this? I imagine a veterinary geneticist would tear their hair out hearing that logic.
They absolutely would. I would tear my hair out.
Right.
Because surviving previous veterinary visits does not mean the dog lacks the mutation. It simply means the dog hasn't been administered one of the specific trigger drugs yet.
Yes. So they just got lucky.
Yes. Relying on past luck is literally playing Russian roulette with pharmacology.
And there is zero reason to guess because the genetic test is just a simple cheek swab.
So simple.
You swab the dog, you mail it to a lab, and you have the definitive blueprint for the rest of the dog's life.
Exactly.
You literally hand those results to your vet, and they can tailor every single future anesthetic protocol and prescription to completely bypass the risk entirely.
It is the absolute pinnacle of actionable preventive medicine. You completely remove the threat.
Okay, so since we are already discussing the brain and neurological vulnerabilities, let's explore the final major clinical area in our sources.
The nervous system.
Right, the paradox of a hyper-alert brain. We've established that Australian Shepherds are bred to process immense amounts of environmental data,
Sheep moving, wind shifting, handler commands.
all simultaneously. So, does engineering a brain to run that hot, so to speak, inadvertently wire it for electrical misfires?
That is a highly compelling way to look at idiopathic epilepsy, which definitely has a notably higher prevalence in this breed.
And idiopathic means what exactly?
Idiopathic means the seizures arise without an obvious external structural cause. So it's not a tumor, it's not a head trauma, and it's not a toxin.
It's just an inherited neurological flaw.
Exactly. In highly reactive, environmentally sensitive breeds like the Aussie, the threshold for an electrical storm in the brain basically appears to be lower.
I noticed the research explains seizures as an imbalance between excitatory and inhibitory neurotransmitters.
Right.
Essentially, the glutamate, the excitatory chemical, is firing way too hard, and the GABA, the calming chemical, just can't pump the brakes fast enough.
That's a perfect summary. And that imbalance results in a completely uncontrolled electrical cascade.
And what does that actually look like for the owner?
Well, that electrical cascade manifests in several different ways, and owners really need to know what they're looking at. We always tend to expect this super dramatic full-body convulsion.
Right, the grand mal seizure with a total loss of consciousness and the paddling limbs.
Exactly. But focal seizures are just as relevant and much easier to miss.
A focal seizure being localized to just one part of the brain?
Yes. So the dog might remain completely conscious, but they'll exhibit bizarre involuntary behaviors.
Like what?
They might aggressively bite at the air, as if they're trying to catch invisible flies.
Oh, wow. I wouldn't have thought of that as a seizure.
Right. Or they might experience localized facial twitching, or even just stand perfectly still, staring blankly at a wall, entirely unresponsive to their name for a minute or two.
That's wild, but if you are standing in your kitchen and your dog goes into a full convulsive seizure, the human instinct is just sheer panic.
Of course it is. It's terrifying to watch.
What is the actual clinical protocol for an owner in that exact moment?
Okay. Your only job in that moment is observation and environmental management. Do not try to hold or restrain the dog.
Just let them ride it out.
Yes. Clear the area of hazards, push the coffee table away, block the stairs so they don't fall. But the absolute most critical safety rule for the owner is to keep your hands far, far away from the dog's mouth.
Because they could bite.
A seizing dog has absolutely no conscious control over their jaw muscles, and they will bite down with crushing force.
Okay, hands away. Got it.
Instead, you need to pull out your phone and time the episode.
Why is the exact time so important?
Because the difference between a seizure lasting 45 seconds and one lasting 4 minutes changes the entire emergency veterinary protocol.
Yeah, it makes total sense.
Mm-hmm.
So what does this all mean for the dog's future? If an owner sees one seizure, is that it? Is it a guaranteed lifelong diagnosis of epilepsy?
No, not necessarily. Diagnosis is actually a process of exclusion.
Okay.
A single seizure definitely warrants an immediate vet visit, but the vet has to methodically rule out other triggers first.
Like what else could cause it?
Did the dog ingest a toxin in the yard? Is there a severe metabolic imbalance, like plummeting blood sugar?
Mm-hmm.
Or, depending on the dog's age, is it an age-related issue, like a brain lesion?
Which briefly touches on the overarching specter of canine aging that was in the sources. The journals do mention hereditary cancer predispositions in certain bloodlines.
Yes, they
But
may.
cellular division errors over time remain the universal risk factor, right?
Absolutely. Age is the ultimate variable here. The longer cells divide, the higher the mathematical probability of a mutation.
Right.
That applies to oncology just as much as it applies to the cumulative wear on the joints we discussed, or the progressive degradation of the retina.
So synthesizing all of this data, the biomechanics of the joints, the cellular apoptosis in the eyes, the MBR1 blood-brain barrier pump, the neurological thresholds, how do you practically apply this to the daily life of an Australian Shepherd?
Well, the clinical consensus really revolves around establishing a strict baseline of normal for your specific dog.
A baseline?
Yes, because you simply cannot detect a subtle neurological deficit or a minor gait abnormality if you don't intimately know how your dog moves, how they process commands, and how they recover from exercise when they are perfectly healthy.
It's about spotting the delta, the deviation from their standard operating procedure.
Exactly.
So if a dog that normally hikes 5 miles without even panting suddenly starts lagging behind at mile 2, you don't just assume they're having an off day.
You investigate the deviation. And honestly, this proactive philosophy extends to the origin of the dogs themselves. We have to look at the breeding practices.
The sources make it super clear that responsible breeding isn't just putting two good-looking dogs together. It is an incredibly intensive data-gathering process.
It really is. A responsible breeder is actively utilizing all the diagnostic tools we've discussed today.
So they are submitting the parents to formal orthopedic scoring for hips and elbows?
Yes. They're bringing in veterinary ophthalmologists for genetic eye certifications. They are running the MDR1 genetic panels.
So they have a full genetic profile before they ever breed.
Right. They use that aggregate data to ensure they are never matching two carriers of the same recessive flaw. They are actively working to shrink the prevalence of these bottlenecks in the gene pool.
But biology is inherently chaotic, right?
Yeah.
Genetic testing reduces statistical probability. It doesn't print a flawless animal.
No, nothing is 100% guaranteed.
And I want to emphasize something that often gets lost in these purebred discussions. A rescue Australian shepherd, whose lineage is just a total mystery, deserves this exact same standard of proactive medicine. I mean, you don't need a pedigree to swab a cheek for the MDR1 mutation or to schedule a baseline eye exam.
Not at all. The diagnostic tools work precisely the same way, whether the dog is from a champion bloodline or the local shelter.
But if my dog is highly active, tearing around the yard and catching frisbees, they must be perfectly healthy, right?
This raises an important question because that is the trap so many owners fall into.
Assuming activity equals health.
Exactly. Their exercise tolerance can remain remarkably high even as these conditions progress early on. Structured vet screenings catch things that an owner watching their dog run simply cannot see.
So we arrive at the ultimate question after tearing through all this clinical data. Are Australian Shepherds, on the whole, healthy dogs?
Yes, they are incredibly robust, dynamic animals.
Even with all these risks?
Even with them. Highlighting these specific biological bottlenecks is not an indictment of the breed. It is simply the reality of mapping the genome of a highly specialized working animal. When properly managed, they routinely live exceptionally vibrant, long lives.
It circles entirely back to the blueprint analogy we started with.
It really does.
We know the load-bearing walls that are most likely to take stress. We know the electrical system runs a little hot.
Right.
So you mitigate those risks by sourcing the dog responsibly, keeping the physical frame lean to protect the cartilage, utilizing early ophthalmic screenings, and immediately running that MDR1 genetic swab.
By doing so, you completely change the trajectory of those genetic predispositions.
Which brings us back to that initial image of the dog on the hillside, anticipating the flock, operating at absolute peak physical and mental capacity.
It's an incredible thing to witness.
It is. The drained stress, the hyperreactive nervous system, they are just the inescapable flip side of the coin to that breathtaking intelligence and stamina.
The traits we marvel at are inextricably linked to the vulnerabilities we have to manage.
Exactly. Which leaves you, the listener, with a final thought to ponder as we wrap up this deep dive. When we, as humans, intentionally engineer an animal's genome over generations to produce hyper-specific, truly elite physical and mental abilities, do we inherently obligate ourselves to act as the lifelong clinical guardians of the genetic vulnerabilities that inevitably come along for the ride?
We architected the blueprint, so we are responsible for the maintenance.
Think about the mechanics of that trade-off the next time you watch them working out on that hillside.